when you're measuring your finger up for a ring, one way you can do it is to get a standard set of ring gauges and then find the one that most closely matches your finger size. Then you can measure the diameter, multiply by pi to get the circumference, and then you can use that to measure the length of the piece of silver you need. However, there's an alternative way of doing it, which is a jeweler's trick. You get a piece of fine wire, this binding wire, longer than you think you're going to need. You create a loop, then you put it on a ring mandrel to make it round. Then you test it to see if it's the right size for your finger. If it's too loose, tighten it up. If it's not loose enough, then you can loosen it a bit. Keep doing that, tighten it until it becomes the right size for your finger. Use the mandrel again to make it round if you need to. A little bit tighter than that still. Okay, might be just a little bit tight, but I tend to find if you use this technique then a little bit tight's usually good, because by the time you finish making it the ring's stretched a little bit anyway. So it's probably about the size that I want. Okay, so now I've got a piece of wire, a loop, that's about the size that I want for my ring. So now that we've got a loop of wire the same size as we want for our ring, we're going to cut it open. We'll cut it in the middle here. So if we cut it near the twisty bit, sometimes it gets a bit vague as to where the ends of the loop are. So we get it like that, cut it open, straighten it out, and that shows us what length of metal we need in order to make this ring. So what I'm going to do now is get a piece of sheet silver, and I'll mark it up in order to cut the ring. Today I'm going to make a ring using 1mm sheet silver. It's going to be 5mm wide, so I've just marked 5mm wide there and there. Normally I would mark it up using a scriber, actually scribe a line into it, or draw using pencil, but the scribed lines often are very hard to see because the silver is quite reflective. So today I'm going to experiment using a Sharpie instead. This can come off using methylated spirits afterwards. So I'm going to mark that up. Okay, that should work reasonably well. And that should be a lot easier to see than pencil lines or scribe lines. Now you can see that I've made the piece of silver the same length as the unwrapped piece of wire that I measured up with before. Now I'm going to cut that out with a saw, and then I'll go through the rest of the steps in turning that into a ring. Now I'm about to start cutting this with a piercing saw. You might notice, because I'm right-handed, I've actually marked it up on the left-hand side of the piece of silver. The reason for this is you need to cut along on the outside of the line rather than the inside. So it means I want to be cutting on the outside with the line on the left-hand side. If you cut along the line, you end up narrowing your piece of metal more than you want to. But because I'm cutting on the right-hand side and I'm right-handed, it's easier to see it if the line is to the left, which is more towards the center line. So I'll start cutting that. In order to get the cut started, we actually run the piercing saw backwards a little. These are designed to cut when you move the saw straight down. However, to get it started, we run backwards like this a little bit. Get a little notch started there. Once it's got a bit of a notch started, we can start cutting. And as soon as we've got the cut going, we start tilting the saw back towards the vertical. We want to cut vertically as much as we can with a piercing saw to avoid, particularly when you're cutting curved shapes, you want to cut vertically to avoid having cuts at funny angles. It's not so important when you're cutting a straight line. Now these piercing saw blades are quite narrow and they tend to break quite easily. Okay, I've managed to avoid breaking any blades so far. I've been cutting just along the right hand side of the line there. So far the experiment with the Sharpie seems to be working pretty well, so I think I might stick with that technique in future for marking out. In the meantime, I'll keep cutting. I managed to cut a fairly straight line. If you are going to waver a bit, try to make sure that you weave to the outside, because if you cut into the metal you're not going to be able to fill the hole back up. If you cut off to the right, the outside of the line, then you'll be able to file it smooth later. Okay, I've finished the cut along the length of the ring and I've almost finished the cut along the width. I'm just going to cut through the final bit of it now. So far my piercing saw blade has managed to live throughout the ordeal. Now because the bit of metal is about to fall off, I'll clamp it down with my fingers on the other side as well. Good, we're through. And my piercing saw blade lives to fight another day. So there's the final strip of metal. It's come out pretty straight.